In today's video, we're going to discuss the accusation made by the prosecution in the Lucy Letby case that Lucy Letby took home a paper towel as some form of trophy for her supposed murders. Now, this was merged in with more commonly known accusations regarding handover sheets that she'd also taken home. I'm going to be addressing the handover sheets in a video in the future, but the two topics merged together, so the handover sheets will certainly come into this video as well. But this video primarily examines the accusation that was made in court that Lucy Letby deliberately took home a paper towel and that she valued this paper towel as some sort of trophy of the murders that she had supposedly carried out. So in this video, we're going to look at what was actually said in court when barrister for the prosecution, Nick Johnson, was cross-examining Lucy Letby. And we're going to begin, before we get into this paper towel issue, we're going to begin with this exchange that begins at the top of the page here. So Nick Johnson is the questions here, Lucy Letby is the answers. And it begins with, I'm going to suggest to you that the first day you worked on the neonatal unit as a student was June the 1st, 2010. Okay. And the reason I'm making that suggestion to you is that there is a handover sheet in your house, or was a handover sheet in your house from that date. Yes. Are you agreeing with me? Yes, at that time that we're talking about, students did not have handover sheets. Why didn't you say that when I asked you the question a few minutes ago that we did get handover sheets when I was a student, but the students no longer get handover sheets? I believe I did say that at the time, that the practice now is that they do not have a handover sheet. Are you doing your best to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, Lucy Letby? Yes. Where was that handover sheet dated June the 1st, 2010? I have no idea. Did you have a keepsake box with roses on it in your house at 41 Westbourne Road? Yes. What was in the keepsake box? I can't recall from memory. One of the things in the keepsake box was that handover sheet, wasn't it? I don't know. I don't have any recollection of where the handover sheets were. So there's a reason we're going through this, and the first thing that I should say is that this was 12 years ago. That's the first thing. So Lucy Letby's talking about something that occurred 12 years ago. So I would firstly ask anyone who is watching this video or listening to this audio, do you know everything in your house, and do you recall everything that you did 12 years ago, and can you pinpoint things exactly with regard to where they are and precisely what is in what box in every single aspect of your house? I would suggest the answer to that question for most people will be no. As I mentioned in an earlier video, there's some discussion during the court case of whether or not Lucy Letby is a shredder. I don't actually know if I have a shredder in my house now. I don't think I do. I mean, I'm saying I don't think I do, but I think there probably is a shredder, because I had one. Of course, I never used it. I mean, I'm not going to go through my bank statements shredding them and stuff like that. I'm way too lazy. There's no way I'm going to do stuff like that. So obviously this was something my mum suggested that I get, and I used it probably once, and I thought, sod it, I'm not doing this ever again. So I put it in the back of a cupboard. It's possible that I threw that shredder away, but I couldn't say with any confidence that I did. I literally don't know if it's in my house or not. This was part of the court case with Lucy Letby, where she was grilled on whether or not she had a shredder. Now she's being grilled on something that was in a box that dates back 12 years. On top of that, since then, she's been thrown off her unit, had the job taken away, been arrested 3 times, been incarcerated. Now she's in a court case facing life sentences. Of course, we know she got 14 life sentences and then 15. So it wouldn't be terribly surprising if she didn't have the best memory of this box, would it? So that's the first thing I want to mention. The second thing is there's a reason that we're going over this before we go into the paper towel thing, and that's because of a critical aspect of this that Nick Johnson is going to move on to. So he says here, I'm going to show it to you as the police recovered it, please. It's exhibit WG, or is that W? Yeah, it's WG3. Just have a look at that if you would. Is that from your house? I can't say I don't recall this specific individual sheet, no. Just take it in your hands. What's unusual about it? Pick it up. What's unusual about it? I don't know what you mean. It's a standard handover sheet. It is, but how does it differ from all the other handover sheets that you took home? It hasn't got handwriting on it. That's one difference. Another is, it hasn't got any folds in it either, has it? It's in pristine condition. Is this the original? It is the original in the keepsake box in your house. Okay. You knew where you were keeping these handover sheets, didn't you? So already that's a misrepresentation. So he's saying you knew where you were keeping these handover sheets, plural, trying to put them all under one banner, put them all under one umbrella, and mix them all in together. There's one handover sheet here. It's the one that he mentioned. It's the one that he's put in his hand. And now he's trying to say you knew where you were keeping these handover sheets. Again, we'll come on to the significance of this in a second. No, they were in several locations, I believe, throughout the property, which is absolutely correct. Again, we will discuss this later in the video. They were, so he agrees. We can't disagree. And there were 99 handover sheets from your time as a student, weren't there, in your house? I can't comment on that. I don't know how many there were. Does that sound about right? I wouldn't know. I don't know how many handover sheets I had in different locations until I've been told now how many there were in total. You are not, and you have not been prepared to tell the truth about these handover sheets, have you? The truth is what I've told you. I want to deal with a bit of evidence that you gave yesterday on the subject of handover sheets. If Mr. Murphy would help me please by opening up the screen's tile 331 in the child O sequence. Do you remember giving evidence about this? Yes. So, also, this is important actually. And your explanation I'm going to suggest, and I'd ask you to either agree or disagree, was that you took the handover sheet for 23rd of June home, and the reason you took it home was because on the back of it you had written down some details of drugs that had been given to baby O or another child that you were looking after that day. Am I right so far? There was documentation on there. I'm not sure exactly what was on there, but yes, the handover sheet did have writing on it, yes. So I'm going to stop at this point because it goes on for a very long time, and I will focus on the handover sheets cross-examination in a future video. The important thing here is that the prosecution has pointed out that Lucy Letby placed a handover sheet in pristine condition, as they described it, in a keepsake box that featured roses. Now, it obviously wasn't very important to Lucy because this occurred 12 years ago and she'd completely forgotten about it. Whether or not she should strictly be doing that, probably she shouldn't. But in reality, it's not a big deal, clearly. And anyway, it's nothing to do with murder. But the absolutely most important aspect of this is that this one sheet of paper that was kept in a keepsake box dates back to 2010, which even now predates any supposed crimes on the ward, let alone the crimes that were involved in this court case, the supposed crimes, which were from 2015 and 2016. And it's clear, as we continue to look at this court case, and as you look at the handover sheets, that was the only one that was treasured. There was a general accusation from the prosecution that Lucy Letby was keeping these handover sheets, and later, as we'll see in this video, a paper towel, as trophies, as souvenirs. But we know for a fact that the only one she treasured in any way was this one that's in a keepsake box, and that is completely unrelated to the case. Now, it's very important to establish that before we continue and look at this paper towel and look at what the prosecution said about it. So this cross-examination of Lucy Letby continues, and eventually Nick Johnson gets to the point where he says, I'm not interested in the front of this document for these purposes, I'm interested in the back and your notes. You point out to us where the notes and the medications are you have made on the back of that document. There's a note about caffeine and baby P. Right, so this is the top left, yes. Yes. Caffeine underlined, yes. Right, okay, anything else for baby P? No. Baby O? No, the drugs were written on a paper towel, I believe. So this is where she's now introducing the paper towel that we're going to discuss in this video. The child whose name has been edited out, who was the third child in nursery 2, there's no medications. So your evidence to the jury yesterday is that you took that home because it had caffeine written on it, and that you brought it in the next day to help you remember what caffeine, is that the thing you're struggling? I didn't say that. I didn't say that I'd taken it because of caffeine. No, you said you took it for the drugs. Yes, with the paper towel that was also with it. There's a paper towel with it. Yes, we've seen the paper towel, haven't we? Well, there have been a couple of paper towels. I'm interested. You were answering questions about the handover sheet. That's why I started with reminding you of what your evidence was. Were you telling the truth to the jury yesterday? Yes. The Morrison's bag. When did that bag go under your bed? So, let's be crystal clear here. These documents have been found in a carrier bag that's stuffed under a bed. So, there's no evidence here that these are treasured in any way. But this cross-examination is going to go on for quite some time from this point. I can't recall a specific date when I've put that under the bed. Well, give us a range of dates if you would, please. Well, the Ibiza bag sort of replaced that bag, so it would be after, just before that time maybe, or after. So just before, so sometime around the 20-something of June 2016. I can't be specific, but the Ibiza bag became my new work bag, yes. Right, and in the Morrison's bag there were 31 handover sheets, we've heard, haven't we? Yes. And they were dated between July 2014 and then April 2015 through to June 2016. Do you accept that? So I want to point out at this point, again, there are numerous handover sheets here. We already know, this is already established, that most of the materials in the house are nothing to do with the court case. But again, this is the prosecution just acknowledging this by giving these dates. Yes, obviously, I can't see it now, but if it's been agreed, then yes. I can produce the sheets. Would you like to see them? No, if it's been agreed. How did all those handover sheets get into that bag? They didn't get there on their own, did they? No. So you tell us the process between emptying out your uniform when you're about to launder it to those handover sheets ending up in that bag, please. When I've come home from work, I've taken my uniform off, the contents of the pockets have gone into the work bag. And where does the work bag then go on the next day, the next work day? To work. Yes, so what? You're ferrying handover sheets to and from the Council of Chester, is that what you're saying? I can't say definitively. Well, that must be what you're saying, mustn't it? I accept they're all in that bag, yes. Well, they're all in the bag when the police find it, right. What I'm more interested in is, first of all, why you put them into that bag at all. I can't recall. So we're going to stop at this point just to discuss another issue related to this that is important. So historically, the NHS used to wash nurses' uniforms. They used to be laundered on site, and in fact nurses weren't supposed to travel in their uniforms. This was something that various nurses have told me. Actually, I wasn't aware of that because I've quite often seen nurses travelling in their uniforms, so I wasn't aware that it was ever a practice. But as is mentioned here, this was started to be terminated as a practice in the 1980s and 1990s for the usual reason of cost cutting, because they decided that, we're wasting money, nurses should wash their own uniforms, which I suppose, given how underfunded the NHS is generally, I suppose any cost cutting measures might help. But typically, you'd have to say that in an ideal world they would be washed on site. There's obvious hygiene issues here that could be significant, but there is actually some kind of historical precedent for this that is on the screen now. I'm not going to read the whole thing out because it goes on for quite a long time, but yeah, they've been criticised for lack of infection control. It's obviously a burden on staff, etc., etc. But the point is that these papers have come home with Lucy Letby. It's fairly obvious that she can just put things in her pocket during the working day. It's a very busy working day. Then she can leave them. Then she takes them home. Then she realises, well, I shouldn't be transferring them back and forth between the hospital and home, so I'll just store them. And then she should have shredded them, and she didn't, for pretty much the same reason that I didn't shred things with my shredder, because I think in her case she's probably too busy. She's too busy doing other things, and she thought, well, they're not of any significance. They're not any documents of significance to her. They don't really have confidential patient information. She knows they're not going anywhere else, but equally she knows she shouldn't throw them in the bin. But had she considered these documents to be of any significance, she could have shredded them, because we spent a significant amount of time in this court case discussing a shredder. So Lucy could have put all these documents through the shredder, and then no more confession notes, no more handover sheets, no more paper towels. Basically, the police would have contributed nothing to this case. I suppose they could have still looked at her phone and still put the text message in the court case, like the one where she's discussing her holiday in Torquay and the one where she won the Grand National, but they really would have been very limited with their contribution. So that's just a kind of significant aspect of this, is that the actual situation with Lucy Letby and the fact that basically every nurse that I've spoken to has told me I've taken handover sheets home, I've probably got handover sheets in my house right now. That's a consequence of this policy, and that's a consequence of corner cutting and cost cutting, essentially. So you can see here in this bit that I've already read out, Lucy Letby saying, they have no meaning to me at all, they're just pieces of paper. So under any normal circumstances, that would seem like a prosaically obvious observation. So what we're going to look at in this video, as it continues, as we continue to see the cross-examination of Lucy Letby on this matter, is whether or not this explanation rings true, or whether or not the claims of the prosecution ring true. So she's continued with his comments about putting things in different places. And here the question comes from Nick Johnson. Oh yes, you have. And that's one of the reasons I asked you the questions about where you were living at various points. Yes, I accept possessions come with me to multiple addresses, and that's including these handover sheets, as well as many other handwritten things, cards, letters, notes. It's the paper that I accumulate, not the content. The question that the jury may be interested in is why. I have difficulty throwing things away. Is that why you bought a shredder? I did have a shredder at some point, yes. Yes, that wasn't the question. The question is your difficulty in throwing things away the reason why you bought a shredder? I bought a shredder for certain documents once I bought the house, yes. Right. Which documents were going to go in the shredder? Predominantly bank statements. Why not handover sheets? I didn't know I had the handover sheets. They were insignificant to me at the time. So let's just pause for a second here. So not only has the prosecution introduced the shredder, which she could have used to shred these documents if she thought they were in any way incriminating, but also, in addition to that, I just want to say at this point before I go any further, I accept that it is the job of the prosecution to prosecute, and they've got to drag up anything that they possibly can, and they've got to make it seem to the jury as if what they're saying has some validity. But the prosecution must know. Nick Johnson is not an idiot. He must know that this line of inquiry has absolutely no validity whatsoever. He must know that these are just things that are stored under a bed in a carrier bag that are thrown away, that they found stuff that was in a bin bag in the garage. These have no. They clearly, her explanation here that they were completely insignificant to her is obviously correct. Anyone looking at this objectively would say that, and Nick Johnson knows, and he knows damn well that he's introducing stuff into the court case here that is worthless, absolutely worthless. Not only is it worthless in terms of telling you whether or not Lucy Letby has committed murders, but it just has no not only does it have no evidential value, I should say as well, but he knows that it doesn't even have the ring of truth about it. It's obviously, clearly, deliberately misleading. There's no doubt about that, because you couldn't possibly think that someone who'd stuffed a load of sheets in a Morrison's bag, that the prosecution has admitted themselves, treasures those documents, and then she's put them under her bed, and he's saying, why didn't you shred them? But that doesn't make any sense, because if he's saying to her, why didn't you shred them, then he's saying, well, you could have just shredded these at any moment. And of course, if she'd have realised that they were going to be found and that this was going to be put in the court case, she would have shredded them. So let's move on. They were in your work bag, which was going to and from work every day, with lots of other paper as well. Where's all the other paper gone then? I have various amounts of paper at home of different things. No, don't deflect the question. I don't know what you mean, sorry. We're talking about the work bag. Where is all the other paper in the work bag? I'm talking about there's multiple handover sheets in there. Yes, so they're going to and from work with you every day. Every day when you empty out your uniform, you add to the pile. I must have done. I can't recall specifically every day what action I took. Well, of course not, on an individual basis, but what were you thinking as this pile of handover sheets accumulated to almost the size of a phone book? They weren't the size of the phone book in one area. I didn't recall that I had that many in different locations. Well, don't argue about whether it's a phone book or not. What were you thinking as these were accumulating, the handover sheets? I wasn't thinking anything, they're just bits of paper. So put them in the shredder. I didn't shred anything particularly other than bank statements. When did you buy the shredder? I can't recall an exact date that I bought a shredder. I'm not asking for the exact date. Did you have it in Ash House? No. So you bought it in sometime between April the 5th, 2016 and the date that the police knocked on your door? Yes. Why didn't you shred the handover sheets? Because they're insignificant. I haven't shredded a lot of documents in my house that could have been shredded. These are very significant documents, aren't they, Lucy Letby? Well, they are sitting here now. They weren't to me at that time. They're just pieces of paper. They have the names of dead children on them. They have the names of a lot of children on them, yes, and they shouldn't have come home, I agree, but they were in a home with me when nobody else was. They were confidential. They were just put in amongst a lot of other notes and bits of paper, study notes that I've kept my whole life. So this is almost, in a way, this exchange. Lucy Letby's almost taking on the role of an adult here, and she's almost like giving an explanation to a child of what has occurred here, as if, it's almost like she's speaking to an 8-year-old who can't understand something that is blindingly obvious, and Lucy Letby's having to break it down in the detail, like you'd explain something to a child who didn't understand something, basic and fundamental. And so at this point, I just want to mention that there have been suggestions that Lucy Letby didn't perform well in the witness box. I mean, I think that's a pretty outrageous assertion. I think her performance in the witness box was exceptional, considering considering everything she'd been through over the last 6 years, considering she'd been incarcerated for 2 years and had a nervous breakdown, had PTSD, and had been arrested 3 times and had been through 24 hours of police interviews and had her life torn apart. I think she gave an incredibly good account of herself when you consider that the prosecution has every advantage. The prosecution has years to prepare the case. The prosecution knows exactly what they're going to say. Lucy Letby does not know what they're going to say. The prosecution has appeared in court many times previously. Lucy Letby has never appeared in court previously. There is nothing essentially at stake for the prosecution. They'll still just get paid whatever happens. Lucy Letby's life and liberty is on the line. I think under those circumstances, she gave an incredibly patient, quite coherent account of herself. What the prosecution is trying to do the whole time is just trip her up and get her to say one thing out of place, or tie her in knots so that they can say, oh look, this is suspicious because you said we've asked you 2,500 questions, and on question 1,373 you said this, but now on question 1,854 you said that. And we saw already in the closing statement of the prosecution, they're very keen to brand Lucy Letby as a liar. Even though, if you actually look at, and I think I've read all of the cross-examination of Lucy Letby now, so I'd love to go through the whole thing. We'll go through as much as we can as the months go by, but I wanted to go through this first. And I think she gave a very good account of herself under very difficult circumstances, and I think almost all of the prosecution cross-examination of her was very weak. This is a particularly weak section, but I think in general terms she did as well in the witness box as could possibly be expected. And I think people have to understand it's difficult for anyone to get up there in the witness box and perform up against these barristers who do it all the time. And as I say, the critical thing is the barristers have nothing at stake. If they lose the case, they still get their money, and Nick Johnson is a highly regarded KC who'll just get, at the time, a QC because the Queen was still alive, who will just get given another case. He doesn't really care if he wins or loses, except it slightly enhances his reputation if he wins. But ultimately, he's willing to say almost anything to win. Clearly, I mean that's crystal clear. But in terms of the outcome, it doesn't matter really. He's got to earn his paycheck. Obviously, for Lucy Letby, the outcome is absolutely critical. So that makes it obviously far more pressurised for her. Even not taking into account the disparity in experience between the two of them and the advantages that the prosecution have. And it's fairly astounding to me that you have, for example, a journalist such as Judith Moritz saying, oh, Lucy Letby did this and Lucy Letby did that. Like as if she would fare any better in the witness box at her level of intellect. She wouldn't have done any better. She would have done worse, probably. It's very, very difficult. I'm not saying I would fare better than Judith Moritz. I probably wouldn't. It's very difficult. The prosecution know exactly what they're doing. The barrister knows exactly what he's doing, or her if it's a female. They're going to throw all kinds of stuff at you. It's all been prepared for years. They're just trying to do anything they can to trip you up. They're quite willing to lie about you. They're quite willing to fabricate things. They're quite willing to misrepresent things. It is extremely difficult, and that's why they often don't put the defendant in the witness box. For example, in the case of, I hate to say his name because he's such a preposterous character, but P. Diddy, if that's what he's calling himself now, that rapper who's just been on the sex charges. Now, he's been found not guilty of many of them, fair enough. I don't, there's been a court process, and I'm not disagreeing with that verdict for a second, but he wasn't put up in the witness box. He didn't say a word during the court case. And the reason for that is it's likely he would have incriminated himself, regardless of whether he's guilty, because he's nowhere near as intelligent as Lucy Letby. So, I think perhaps American barristers may not be quite as polished as British. I mean, I don't know if that's true, but broadly speaking, I think it's recognised that there are exceptional barristers in this country. Nevertheless, I'm pretty sure a barrister in America can tie P. Diddy in knots. So they typically, if there's a chance of being found guilty, and P. Diddy, this rapper, was found guilty of some charges, then you don't put your witness in the stand, as it's called in America, and in the witness box, as it's called in this country because they can incriminate themselves very easily, and typically the prosecution will just destroy them or make them say things that are not advisable, etc., etc. So even the fact that Lucy Letby went into the witness box is significant, but once she was in there, she did as well as could be reasonably expected. And if anyone is sitting there now, or broadly speaking, thinks, "Oh, I'm super intelligent. I just go in there and..." No, it's very, very hard, regardless of your level of intelligence, regardless of how good you may believe yourself to be with words and how articulate you may be. It's tough. It's very, very tough in the witness box. And the reason Lucy Letby did well is firstly because she's an intelligent person, but more importantly because she was telling the truth, because she's innocent. That's why she was able to give a good account of herself, because she didn't have to make up a story. She didn't have to fabricate things. She didn't have to engage in a narrative. She didn't have to remember what the truth was. In fact, when she couldn't remember things, she said, "Sorry, I can't remember that." That's another very clear indicator of innocence. But the idea that she didn't give a good account of herself in court is yet another stupid assertion that's been made by the likes of Judith Moritz, by various other people, and is completely unfounded. So we'll continue with the court proceedings, but I'm going to have to comment immediately after the very next section. So she makes this comment about, explaining about keeping pieces of paper. And then Nick Johnson says to her, "Are you really asking the jury to accept that pieces of paper with sensitive information about dead children are insignificant?" And she says yes. So that's a very typical prosecution and barrister's trick. It's pretty underhanded, because the whole crux of his argument is saying that the pieces of paper are significant to her. And she's saying, "They're not significant to me at all. They're of no significance to me whatsoever. They're just pieces of paper that have come home with me." So then he's like shifting the argument, shifting the goalpost, saying, "Oh, are you saying there's dead children on these pieces of paper? Are you saying that they're insignificant?" But actually, she's never claimed that. She's just said that they're insignificant to her. So it's a completely false equivalence, which is obviously done completely deliberately. It's just the kind of manipulation that barristers seemingly engage in all the time. As far as we can tell, obviously we don't know because court proceedings for some reason are not recorded in this country, so you have to go through the ridiculous rigmarole of trying to get the transcripts. For all we know, this is happening in courtrooms all over the country all the time. I assume that it is. Given the gravity and seriousness of this court case and the fact that no one ever objected to anything, I assume that this kind of manipulation is just completely normal. Anyway, let's move on to the next question. "I'd like to look at baby M's blood gas document, please. It's Exhibit 7 and A. These documents were found in your Morrison's bag, weren't they?" Yes. "Are they insignificant at the time of being found?" Yes. "So a child who brushed with death, these are his blood gas readings taken whilst he was being resuscitated. You regard those as insignificant?" "I think the context is different. These have come home with me with many babies. They're not just for the babies on the indictment. It's not insensitive. They've just come back as pieces of paper and have ended up being treated that way, as pieces of paper. They haven't come home with you, have they? You took the item home." "I took the item home, yes, but not with any intention." "Why do you keep saying 'come home with me' as if they were active, as if they were doing the action?" She shouldn't apologise for this, but I apologise if that's my turn of phrase, but that's how I see it. Came, took, whichever, they've come back with me. I took them back, however you want to word it. It's you trying to separate yourself from a conscious act, isn't it? No. So it's clear that this isn't a conscious act, because we've already established there are numerous pieces of paper here that have nothing to do with the court case. So why would she take those home as a conscious act? It doesn't even make any sense. "Do you remember what you said about these documents to your counsel a couple of days ago, about this specific document?" Yes. "No, I don't recall that was presented to me during that time." Or probably should be what was presented. "You were asked about it." Right. "Okay, we'll deal with that first of all. Open it out to remind yourself of what it says. You were asked the question, did you use the machine? You answered the question with a question. You replied, at this time." Mr. Myers followed up with, "During the course of what happened with baby M, you replied yes. Was that true?" "Did I use the blood gas machine for child M? Is that what you're asking?" That was the question he was asking you. "Well, I can't possibly say for definite. This is a printout, yes." Again, I'll remind you that these are... Think of the thousands and thousands of things that happened to Lucy Letby when she worked on this unit, and they're asking her to isolate individual incidents on particular days that even within that particular day is very difficult to recall. You might even not remember 2 to 3 days later, let alone 6 years later after you've been through a load of traumatic experiences. It's completely unfeasible. It would be like me. Imagine I got arrested tomorrow, and I haven't had a job where you're in a workplace for quite a long time. But imagine if they started asking me about, oh, so when you worked in so and so place on this date, can you remember if you used the photocopier on the? No, not really. It's preposterous, utterly preposterous, and as well in this circumstance, bear in mind, this is to discuss documents that are, and firstly, documents are of no significance. That's blatantly obvious. Firstly, and then secondly, it has nothing to do with the allegations. All of this is just trying to paint Lucy Letby in a certain way. Firstly, attempting to um, I would say imply, but they're trying to say it explicitly, but they don't actually have any explicit evidence. So I'm not sure how you would describe it, but they're trying to characterize her behaviour as dishonest or somehow not straight. And then secondly, obviously Nick Johnson is very explicitly trying to make the allegation that she deliberately took pieces of paper home because they were of some significance to her. Obviously, by the end of this, it will be very clear that's not the case. It's already clear by now, but I will go everything and summarise everything when we get to the end of this section. So she says, I can't possibly say for definite, and then move on to the next question. Why would you have the item at home? Can you help us with that, you were asked. And as you do, you said, it's come back with me from work in my uniform. So again, he's trying to claim that this is dishonest, whereas of course it's a rather obvious explanation for what has occurred, particularly given that there are numerous documents at home that have nothing to do with this court case. Like that's not contentious information. That's something the prosecution have introduced. But we'll return to that later. Once you've got the printout from the machine, what would you have done with it in real time on the unit? You replied, I would put it in my pocket and then taken it to the cot side to then write up on the charts that we've seen, the handwritten charts. You would then ask the question. The question that arises is why it doesn't go in the bin after that. Why doesn't it? You replied, that is an error on my part. Is that right, what I've just read out to you there? Yes. Was that true? Yes. Do you remember a nurse called Nurse B? Yes. You know her very well, don't you? I know her as a colleague, yes. Do you remember what Nurse B's evidence was about that printout? No. Really? I can't recall that now. We've heard a lot of information. I can't recall that. Sorry. Well, let's look at tile 171, please, Mr. Murphy. What's the time on the document you've got in front of you? 1622. So what I want to emphasise before we go over this bit of cross-examination is that these paper towels are just literally, as Lucy herself explained, when they're working on the unit, they will just take a paper towel out of the dispenser and they will use that because they don't want to waste time, because these are life or death situations, it's vulnerable infants, everything we've been over many times previously. So she'll take a paper towel, and other nurses will take paper towels out of the dispenser and they'll just scroll things, like almost like writing on the back of a cigarette packet. You might have heard the joke about, or the kind of facetious remark about, signing contracts on the back of a cigarette packet, for example, with footballers and stuff like that. This is just a scrawled note that she's making because, she doesn't want to find the time to get a pad and a pen, or, a kind of more normal writing material. So you just get a paper towel, scroll something down quickly because it's important. You need to have the blood gas information, or you need to have information related to the drugs, etc., etc. And what is on this particular towel is blood gas information. So it's already absolutely extraordinary that the prosecution would claim that this document is literally a paper towel that has some information scrolled on it, and the prosecution are trying to make the claim that Lucy Letby deliberately took this item home because it had some significance to her, like it had emotional significance to her, although she did put it in a Morrison's carrier bag and then stick it under a bed and then quite obviously never look at it ever again. But anyway, we'll continue with this part of the extraordinary cross-examination of Lucy Letby. So here, Nick Johnson says, do we see the results recorded on the blood gas chart? Yes. Whose handwriting is that? Nurse B. Do you now remember what Nurse B said about that blood gas reading? No. She said she took it, she wrote it onto the chart. Do you remember what she said about what she habitually does with a printout? No. What do you think your colleague Nurse B, she disposed of it? Yes. Where would she dispose of it, do you think? In the confidential waste bin? Yes. When did you fish it out of the confidential waste bin and take it home? I've never fished anything out of the confidential waste bin. How did you get it? I can't recall specifically. It was for your little collection, wasn't it, Lucy Letby? No. So remember, we're going to stop at this point people still say today, it wouldn't surprise me if in response to this video, people say this in the comment section to this video, but people will still say to this day, she fished something out of the confidential waste bin, as if it's a fact, as if they've got it on video, as if it's cast in stone and can never be challenged. Again, it's yet another complete fabrication from the prosecution for which they have no evidence. All that's happened is a nurse has said, I would usually dispose of confidential documents, which is usually what Lucy does, which is usually what any nurse does, although sometimes they forget and sometimes they take them home, as we know, as has been established, as has been expressed by many nurses. And this nurse has said, well, I probably would have put that in the confidential waste bin. So then Nick Johnson has said, oh, Lucy Letby must definitely have fished this out the confidential waste bin. Although, again, no one has seen this, no one has witnessed this, we don't have any evidence for this, it doesn't make any sense, but we'll just say it anyway, we'll just pretend that's the case. And then people repeat and say, oh, she fished a blood glass reading out of the confidential waste bin. Well, there's actually no evidence for that whatsoever. It's yet another thing for which there is no evidence. So let's move on. How she said that already. It was for your little collection, wasn't it, Lucy Letby? Oh yeah, I mean, I'm sure she's going to fish out some notes that she scrawled on a paper towel out of a confidential waste bin so she could take it home because it's a trophy, although she just stuck it in a carrier bag under her bed with loads of other discarded documents that got nothing to do with the case, just like the ones that were found in a bin bag in a garage. But yeah, that was all part of her trophy collection, obviously. They could have gone in the shredder, couldn't they? Yeah, she could have shredded all this stuff, Nick. She could have shredded all this stuff. You're absolutely right. If it was any significant, she could have shredded it. None of the paper that I had went into the shredder. No. That wasn't the question. They could have gone into the shredder, couldn't they? Could have, yes. Okay, now things get a bit surreal. Now we go into a bit of a Dali-esque exchange. How much is a shredder? I don't think that's fair to ask. I don't know. You bought one. I can't recall a specific date and time that I went into a shop and bought a shredder and how much that cost. So even now, a shredder costs 30 quid. At the time, it would have cost about 15 quid. Please bear that in mind as we continue with this piece of cross-examination. Did you have money to burn? What do you mean? Sorry. Did you have so much money that you could just buy whatever you want, whenever you want with it? Now, I'll say something. This guy's got some cheek, considering he's a High Court barrister who easily earns a six-figure salary, that literally applies to him. He can literally just buy anything from Argos anytime he wants, and he wouldn't even notice it go out of his bank account. But he's got some audacity to say this to a nurse. Now, obviously, anyone can afford a shredder. It is not an expensive or frivolous purchase. I bought one, obviously, as I've mentioned, and I never used it. But I don't sit around thinking, oh my God, think of all the money I wasted on that shredder, because they cost virtually nothing. I mean, this is the kind of embarrassing exchange. Remember, this is supposed to be adults. This is supposed to be adults discussing a matter of extreme importance that will decide the liberty of Lucy Letby or otherwise. It ultimately resulted in her receiving 14 life sentences. Yet we're seeing a discussion here that if I was marking a GCSE project and this was including the GCSE project, I'd say, come on, I mean, this material is embarrassing. It's dreadful. This is child level argument. This is like a 12-year-old argument at best. I'd say that's not particularly generous to 12-year-olds, but I mean, come on, this is embarrassing. It's embarrassing. So anyway, it goes on. I don't understand what finance. So she's going to say, I don't understand what relevance finance has to this conversation, which is obviously a perfectly reasonable remark, but then he interrupted her. Well, the jury may be interested, and I'm certainly interested in why you'd buy an electrical appliance that you had no real intention of ever using. Well, I did use it for bank statements. Yes, why did you lie about the shredder in interviews? I couldn't recall that at the time, whether I did have a shredder or not. A shredder is an insignificant item to have in your home. It's like the piece of paper. Yes. Is insignificant. Yes. Do you remember the explanation you gave for what I suggest is, well, let's go to the interview just to remind ourselves of what you actually said. It's about 2/3 of the way down on the page, so I'll just show you where I'm looking. It's page 0A39. Do you see there is a time that says 000841? Yes. And you actually brought up the shredder as we look at the questions and answers. So if we go up about a couple of inches from there, you're asked a question just about halfway down the page. They're asking about the sheets. The interviewing officer asks you, do these sheets that are in your folder that you've kept at your home address, Lucy, relate to the babies which you were designated nurse for? You replied, yes, to all babies that are on the unit at that point, whether you look after them or not. So yeah, You would then ask the question, okay, have you previously taken any of these handover sheets home and disposed of them? And what's your answer to that question? I replied, no, I don't think so, because I haven't got a shredder, and that's how I would have to get rid of them. So I just want to, before we go any further in this remarkable exchange, I just want to look at a few things here. So firstly, when Lucy was asked this question about, do the sheets that are in the folder you've kept at home address relate to babies which you were the designated nurse for? Now, they don't. They don't all relate to babies for which she was the designated nurse. That's the first thing. So Lucy's reply here, which is intended to be honest, is actually more incriminating for her than the actual truth. The truth is that they're not all babies that she was a designated nurse for. She said that they are. So what she has said is actually worse for her than the truth. She could have said, no, they're not all babies for which I was the designated nurse. Now, the fact that we're dwelling on, there's a couple of things to say. The first thing is the fact that we're dwelling so much on one question about a shredder in her interview that has no bearing to anything that happened on the unit whatsoever is frankly ridiculous, surreal. It's just downright odd. But the sole reason this is happening is because Nick Johnson is attempting to portray Lucy Letby as a liar. And this was the best that he could possibly do, because she's done 24 hours of police interviews. She was in the witness box for a very long period of time, and the best thing he could possibly bring up was this shredder, and also a kind of semantic debate about whether or not she was wearing pajamas or whether it was just nightwear. And that's all he could bring up to say that she was a liar. But he was desperate to paint her as being a liar because there was such a lack of substance to the prosecution case. So it's an absolute disaster that Lucy Letby did not have defence witnesses in court, but even with an absolute open goal of having just Dr. Evans' weird concoctions of specious crap that he put into the court case and having no medical witnesses to contest that, if we'd had medical witnesses, they would have torn it to shreds. But even with that open goal, he still had to go into this kind of stuff because actually, so much of Lucy Letby's conduct on the unit, for example, with regard to Child E that I looked at in a previous video, so much of her conduct is actually consistent with an exemplary nurse. So in order to try and smear her character and smear her behaviour in a certain way, he has to go into all these ridiculous things that bear no relation to anything that happened in the court case, and about which his actual line of argumentation either A, doesn't make any sense, or B, is so completely flawed and so unrelated to anything of any relevance that it just becomes... It should be considered a complete embarrassment for everyone that was involved in this prosecution. They don't seem to be embarrassed, but that's probably because they're shameless. But if they had any kind of shame, they would be embarrassed about this. So then the discussion continues. So it's not the police suggesting a shredder to you, is it? So yes, absolutely it is, because Lucy doesn't think that she's got a shredder, so absolutely it is the police suggesting a shredder to her. They're suggesting ways in which I'd have disposed of those handover sheets at home. They've asked me, have I ever taken the handover sheets home and disposed of them? Yes. How is that a suggestion of them, the means by which you get rid of them? Well, they specifically raised the shredder. They specifically raised it. That's how I took disposal to mean a confidential disposal. They never suggest shredder to you, do they? They don't say, have you got a shredder? No. To which you mistakenly answer no. They say, why haven't you got rid of them? And you say, because I haven't got a shredder. I couldn't recall at that time whether I did have a shredder or not. I had just been arrested by the police. Locating a shredder wasn't on my mind. So you just see how ridiculous this is. But also the answers from Lucy are just so obviously correct. It's so obvious that, her explanation here, I'd just been arrested by the police. Locating a shredder wasn't on my mind. It's so obvious that that is true. I don't see how anyone could possibly disagree with this, and yet people will still raise this. People will still raise this as some significant evidence that Lucy Letby was a liar. I've seen that online fairly recently. Well, the shredder was on your mind because you were the person that introduced it into the interview. Yes, in reference to the word disposal. Are you telling the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? Yes, I am. So the only reason we're going through this ridiculous discussion about the price of a shredder, whether she has money to burn, whether she introduced the concept of shredder, or whether it was the police, whether she could have shredded documents, whether she owned a shredder, whether she'd forgotten about the shredder, it's just so they can say, oh, you're a liar, aren't you? which is again, is truly embarrassing misrepresentation of reality. But there you go. We'll have to continue. Do you remember the explanation you gave to the jury on May the 2nd about that question and answer? No, I can't recall all the evidence that I've given. What you said then, it's page 163 of the transcript if anyone wants to check, is it was an oversight. I had forgotten that I did have one. I only acquired it fairly recently. What did you mean by that? I mean, as that is an absolutely blatantly transparent statement, why you would need to ask a question about that or have that explained is difficult to understand. So she says that it was an oversight for me to say that I didn't have a shredder at that time and that I bought one recently in relation to the date of the interview. When did you buy the shredder now that you've been reminded of the fact that you remembered it in police interview? Shortly before this interview, if I've said it was bought recently. There was a shredder box at your parents' home in Hereford, wasn't there? Yes. And that was in your room as I understand your evidence? Yes. Did that box ever leave your parents' house as far as you know? I can't recall specific locations of many boxes over the years, no, but it probably did move with me, yes. Move with you? Well, this is a box for your parents' shredder as I understood the evidence. Did I understand it correctly? The box in the wardrobe? Correct. Do you want me to show you a picture just to remind you? No, I'm okay. So yes, I believe that was my parents' shredder, yes. Is there some doubt in your mind? If I can't recall definitively all the shredders that were in the property and whose belonged to who. Did the Letby family have several shredders? No. All the shredders that were in the property and who they belonged to, what did you mean by that? I mean recalling exactly where a shredder is, or the box that you've kept it in, or where it was bought isn't something that would be a date ingrained in my mind. I don't know where it came from or when it moved, if it moved. Just remind us, because I may have misunderstood what you said on May the 2nd, but I think ultimately you settled on the fact that it was you who wrote keep on the box. Is that right? It may well be. It may well be, or it is, or I can't definitively say it's my writing, but it does look like it, yes. Just remind us why you wrote keep on that box, to keep the box in the shredder. Well, what you said, because his lordship actually asked you questions about this, because I think we were all a little bit unclear on what you were saying on May the 2nd, what you said in answer to questions from his lordship was this was an instruction to your parents to keep the shredder. Did I misunderstand that? No, so the box is labelled in relation to the shredder. So let me just stop at this point. So when I mentioned earlier that the famous rapper who's recently been in court wasn't put on the witness box, this is why he wasn't put on the stand in America, and this is what all other witness boxes it's described in Britain. It's because barristers will do this kind of crap, but when they've got actual evidence that you're guilty, it's a lot worse. So obviously anyone with half a brain or any brain cells whatsoever can see that this is absolute rubbish that has nothing to do with the court case whatsoever. But what they're hopeful always is that they somehow manage to create an impression on the jury that this is of some sort of significance, and somehow manage to indicate that this means that Lucy Letby is dishonest. Now, it's a lot easier to do that when you have evidence of any substance whatsoever. Here, obviously, they're having to pore over ridiculous things that are completely unrelated to the court case and have absolutely no significance whatsoever. But you can see the extent to which barristers will go to try to tie defendants in knots and try to indicate that they're lying and that they're dishonest, which is why if a lawyer or a barrister believes that they can defend a client without putting him or her in the witness box, they will do that because they know they'll be subjected to this kind of thing. And it's very difficult to deal with because they will just go on endlessly. As I say, usually it's topics that actually are of substance. In this case, in this ridiculous court case, it's whether or not a shredder costs £15 or £20. But I think perhaps the most disturbing aspect of this is that we've seen people online commenting who are genuinely convinced by this, who genuinely believe this is significant, who will genuinely cite this as evidence that Lucy Letby is a liar, who genuinely believe that this is a valid kind of area of investigation, area of examination, that it's a valid piece of cross-examination, which is staggering, astounding, unbelievable, chilling, depressing. It's many different things. What it isn't is an indication that people are good at critical thinking, because it's so obvious that this is total rubbish, and yet, I mean, ironic since we're talking about shredders, but yeah, it goes on for quite some time. As I say, the sole reason for this is so that Nick Johnson can firstly suggest that Lucy Letby has kept the paper towel that she scrawled some random information on as some sort of trophy, or as he also described it, souvenir of her killing of an infant. And also it's so that they can try and characterise her as being a liar. So I'll read that part again. Well, what you said, because His Lordship actually asked you questions about this, because I think we were all a little bit unclear on what you were saying on May the 2nd. What you said in answer to questions from His Lordship was this was an instruction to your parents to keep the shredder. Did I misunderstand that? No, so the box is labelled in relation to the shredder. But there's no shredder in the box. No, but it's in the house. Why do you need to write keep on something that's in your room in your parents' house? I can't answer that. Do you remember an answer you gave yesterday about your parents going to your room? Yes. They never go in your room. That's what you said. Yes. They wouldn't go through my things. No. So the question I would like you to answer is, if that is true, why do you write keep on something as an instruction to your parents when that something is in your room that they never go into? I can't answer that. Is the truth of it that you're making up bits of evidence as you're going along? No, because we don't. We know, don't we, what was in the shredder box? No, I've been told yes. Handover sheets, and that's right. Why you wrote keep on the box, wasn't it? No. So at this point, Nick Johnson goes on to talk about the greetings card, and while I'd love to address that, obviously I've lost the will to live at this point. So I'm going to summarise this video and explain some very key aspects of what's just been discussed. Before we go into the summary, I just want to mention one final thing. It wasn't enough that they fabricated this incident with the bin. When Child M was being discussed, they also suggested that Lucy Letby had stayed behind at work purely so that she could fish this out the bin. So Nick Johnson said to Lucy Letby, "You hung around to get your hands on it before you left. I stayed late to do the work that still needed doing. I was busy with other babies on the unit. You were hanging around to get your hands on the paper towel." "No," replied the nurse. "To go rooting in the bin for the paper put there by your colleague." "No, I have never rooted in a bin." "Because you sabotaged Child M by injecting him with air." "No, I didn't." So again, this is just pure fabrication. It's this use of repetition that I've discussed previously. It's actually scary. I mean, it's actually scary what will be put in a court case of this seriousness with these consequences for the defendant. They can't possibly believe the prosecution just sit around going, "Oh, what could we make up about this? Oh, let's just say like she stayed back at work late so that she could fish something out the bin." What absolute crap! It's just embarrassing. This court case is an embarrassment to the country. It is literally a national embarrassment. And the worst thing is, I don't think it's anything out of the ordinary. I think this is just happening all the time in court cases. So let's summarise what has occurred here. The prosecution in the Lucy Letby case have tried to suggest that a random paper towel with some information regarding blood gases scrawled on it is some sort of prized or treasured trophy. Lucy Letby, in common with other nurses, indeed other nurses indicated this during the court case, has randomly scrawled some information on this paper towel because nurses are in a pressurised situation and there was no paper immediately available. This paper towel has then remained in her pocket randomly because she is a busy nurse working in critical circumstances. At one time, the NHS would have washed her uniform for her. She would have handed her uniform in at the end of her shift, and this document could not possibly have come home with her. However, given that this practice has been phased out, Lucy Letby has accidentally taken this document home in her pocket. Now, we know three things for a fact about this case and about these documents. The first thing is, Lucy Letby did keep one document in what was described as a keepsake box. What is significant about this is that it was completely unrelated to the case. It was from her first shift in 2010, whereas all of the alleged incidents from this case occurred between 2015 and 2016. We know that other documents in the case were not kept in any such box, were completely separate from this one document that was treasured, and that there is absolutely no evidence that they were treasured in any way. We also know that the paper towel was found in a Morrison's carrier bag stuffed under her bed, and furthermore, we know that other documents that were cited by the prosecution were located in a bin bag in her garage. Now, it's reasonable to conclude that documents stuffed in a supermarket carrier bag under a bed are of no significance to Lucy and are not treasured in any way. Indeed, Lucy said this herself during cross-examination. Equally, it's reasonable to conclude that a bin bag in a garage is clearly not a location that could be associated with treasuring something, and it also seems rather facile to state that this was something that was ready to be thrown away, except that Lucy couldn't just throw it in the bin because it would be considered confidential. Now, you would think that it was the defence of Lucy Letby that had raised these three things. The fact that there was only one document that was treasured and it was nothing to do with the case. The fact that the paper towel was found in a Morrison's carrier bag stuffed under her bed, and that handover sheets were found in a bin bag in a garage. You would think these are things that the defence raised in order to defend Lucy. But actually, all of these things were raised by the prosecution, and all of these things were referenced by the prosecution. The prosecution raised the keepsake box and the treasured first handover sheet that is nothing to do with the case. The prosecution repeatedly referenced the Morrison's carrier bag, and the prosecution also referenced the bin bag in the garage. There are three reasons that the prosecution concocted this, frankly, utterly ridiculous assertion about the paper towel. The first thing is, they wanted to create this trophy theory because they were desperately short of any meaningful evidence. Secondly, they really needed to concoct some sort of motive for what Lucy Letby had done because the alleged crimes simply don't make sense. They're not consistent with anything that we know about Lucy Letby. She didn't reference the crimes in any of her communications, and there was no sign at the time she was committing these supposed crimes that she'd had the sort of psychological disintegration that would typically be associated with a serial killer. She also clearly doesn't benefit from these supposed crimes in any way. So the prosecution had to find some way, however tenuous, of suggesting to the jury that Lucy Letby derives some sort of pleasure or value from these alleged acts. They can't do that in any credible way, so they had to manufacture these ridiculous stories which are unsupported by evidence. The third reason for this is to attempt to paint Lucy Letby as a liar, to suggest that she has specifically lied about something, and then indicate that this is somehow indicative of her character as a whole. With regard to this last point, the prosecution also made an enormous effort to suggest she'd lied about a shredder when she could in fact have just shredded all the evidence that the police recovered, and none of this would have been used in the court case, even though it has no value anyway. In fact, far from Lucy Letby lying, it is the prosecution that has been caught lying, the prosecution that has deliberately misrepresented countless facets of the case, and the prosecution that has engaged in fabrication and supposition throughout the entire court case. This occurred in the case of the paper towel because the prosecution went to arcane lengths to suggest that Lucy fished this out of a confidential waste bin, even though there was absolutely no evidence to support this whatsoever. The idea that a random paper towel with some notes related to blood gases scrawled on it, that was found in a Morrison's carrier bag stuffed under a bed, that Lucy could have shredded anyway, the idea that this was a trophy is so utterly ridiculous that it would be laughed out of a GCSE project. This whole section of the court case would be laughed out of a children's project, and yet here we have it being seriously advanced in a legal process that decides whether someone sees the light of day ever again. That can only be described as a disgrace and an embarrassment. So the last thing that I'd like to mention in this video is just that we launched this TikTok channel just less than 2 weeks ago, about 10 days ago, and I know nothing about TikTok, so I didn't know what to expect. I thought we might get 1,000 or a couple of thousand views per video and we could build something up. So we've only been doing it for, we've got 12 videos on here. So the one that we did yesterday got to 78,000 views. The one we've done today has got to 128,000. So that just shows you people are aware of this case and there is a big potential for us to get this into the mainstream. I think to get those kind of views in this kind of time frame is incredible. It certainly wasn't something that I expected. So we're doing okay on those sites. None of us knew anything about it. None of us had done anything before, but we've built up to 600 followers in quite a short period of time, so that's pretty good as well. So if you do have TikTok, it may not be something that really appeals to you, but if people can follow us on there, then we're already kind of making an impact, which is surprising, but quite exciting, really. So hopefully we can also help push people to YouTube as well. So yes, that's all I have to say in this video. Hope you found it informative. If you have any queries or comments, please let me know in the comment section. I'll look forward to reading them.